Well, you all are here on a great Sunday. And actually, I don't pretend to be objective. I think every Sunday is great here. But this is particularly a great Sunday because today we are going to provide the definitive answer to the ultimate question, does the universe have a purpose? Has anyone here ever pondered this question? It's an intriguing question. Sometimes it's like 3 a.m. and you wake up and you're thinking, wow, what am I doing here? You know, it's all part and parcel of the same thing. Does the universe have a purpose? And this is one of the questions that an organization called the John Templeton Foundation set out to answer. Some of you may have heard of the Templeton Foundation. You may recognize the name Templeton from the Templeton Trust mutual funds. I mean, lots and lots and lots of money in that thing. Same family. What they did was they took some of the profits from this investment fund and they invested them in this foundation, and they have a mission. Their mission is to help answer the big questions of human purpose and ultimate reality. So, the Templeton Foundation brought together a group of 12 scientists, theologians, and philosophers to weigh in on the question that we're posing this morning. Does the universe have a purpose? And as promised, here is the definitive answer.
All right.
Now, how the heck did that get up here? Now, I'm going to tell you, that's an answer. But the problem is I don't think we know what the question is. So let's go. Next slide. Next slide. Here it is. As promised, the definitive answer from 12 scientists, theologians, and philosophers. Not so definitive, is it? I mean, seriously, did you think they'd all agree? I mean, look at this. They're kind of all over the place on this thing. But it's interesting because it breaks down into a 50-50 split. 6 of them either say no, not sure, or not likely, and 6 say yes, maybe, or I hope so. Now, I'm not going to try to summarize all of their thoughts, but I've given you a link on the insert in your handout so that you can visit the website and read these essays. They're only about a page long. They're short and to the point, and it's really interesting to see all of the different angles from which we can look at this question, all of the multiple perspectives from which they address this question and try to frame an answer. Multiple perspectives are a good thing. But there's one person up there that I want to highlight this morning because he's the one that got me going on this topic today. I read his essay back in December of 2012, and I've been waiting all of this time to talk about it. So it's all his fault. It's this guy in the lower left-hand corner over here with the answer, not sure. Let's get a little better picture of him up there. His name is Neil Degrasse Tyson. And he's an astrophysicist. He's the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. He's got some serious credentials. This is his philosophy of life. I love this. He says, I am driven by 2 main philosophies. Know more today about the world than I knew yesterday, and lessen the suffering of others. You'd be surprised how far that gets you. Well, maybe some people would be surprised, but I don't think anyone here would be surprised at how far a philosophy like that would get you. Now, if you haven't heard of Neil deGrasse Tyson yet, you will. Because he is the heir apparent to this guy, Carl Sagan. And in case you haven't heard, Neil deGrasse Tyson is going to be hosting a remake of the classic 70s TV series Cosmos. Still one of my all-time favorite TV series. And the old Cosmos show was on PBS. The new Cosmos is going to be on Fox and the National Geographic Channel, and it's being co-produced by Seth MacFarlane. Now, if you haven't heard of Seth MacFarlane, he is the inventor of a very popular cartoon, an animated show called The Family Guy. Now, if you've seen The Family Guy, It's some pretty wild stuff. I mean, just imagine Carl Sagan meets the Family Guy. This is going to be interesting. You know, the thinking here, though, is that this new collaboration is going to bring this show and this information to a much wider audiences on 2 cable channels at a time, with the link into the Family Guy. And I think the more people that we can reach with Cosmos, the better, because we need an antidote to the dumbing down of America. Everyone knows who Kim Kardashian and Paris Hilton are, right? But Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, not so much. In fact, I was driving up here today and I heard someone being interviewed on the radio, and he was talking about how our level of conversation in this country has really kind of fallen to a low level. It seems that we are obsessed with gossiping about the misfortunes of mentally ill celebrities, was the point that he was making. And in some ways, that's very true, because you just flip through the channels and boy, you can find all those shows that have nothing more to do than to tell us about those kind of things. Well, this is going to be something to see. I'll be watching it. They don't have a date for certain yet, but starting next year. But for now, getting back to the question of the day, does the universe have a purpose? The thing I liked about Dr. Tyson's response was his honesty and his humility. He's not sure. I think we have to ask just exactly what do we mean by the word purpose? It's got to be our starting point. Usually when we think of purpose, we think of an intention or a plan or a goal, like a composer creating a symphony. All of the notes, all of the instruments are arranged in a certain order so that the end result is brought about as envisioned by the composer when she sat down to write it. That's what we think of when we talk about purpose and intention and creativity. It's a definition of purpose that presupposes the existence of some kind of an entity who thinks more or less the way we do, and then who puts the whole thing together more or less the way human beings design and put things together. So we have all of these metaphors you've probably heard before. The divine watchmaker, right? Or the composer, or the potter's hand. I'm the clay, you're the potter, mold me, create me. I think the problem with this approach, when we use that definition, is that we end up creating a God and a universe that is in our own image and likeness. Human intelligence and human consciousness becomes the pinnacle of creation. We are it. The ultimate and the greatest accomplishment of God and the universe. Of course, the universe has a purpose. Its purpose is to produce me. Right? That's what it ultimately leads to. We used to literally believe that the entire universe revolved around human beings on planet Earth. The sun, the stars, everything that we could see out there revolved around us because we were so special, and we were 100% wrong. Today, we know a heck of a lot more than we did back then, and yet it's still just a drop in the bucket. Another one of Dr. Tyson's essays, he talks about how everyone that we know and love and think about, and everything that we can see and experience around us, and even through a telescope, is around 4% of the universe, which means that 96% of the universe is still unknown to us in some very major ways, which I think explains why he says, I'm not sure, in answer to that question of whether the universe has a purpose. I've said it before, doubt is good. It's good because it keeps us open to possibilities that are as yet unknown to us. And in some ways, maybe that is the purpose of the universe, to give birth to the possible. There's a definition of spirit or God that I like to use that comes to us from something called process theology. They say that God, spirit, or is the creative advance into novelty. And novelty doesn't mean something trivial. It means something new, something exciting. And there is a name for this way of thinking about the universe. It's called possibilianism. If you've never heard of it before, that's because it's a made-up word. There's a neuroscientist, I didn't make it up, there's a neuroscientist at Baylor College of Medicine by the name of David Eagleman. And he is the guy that invented the word, Beyond God and Atheism, Why I Am a Possibilian. And here's what he says about the subject. He says, in every generation, people are seduced by the idea that they possess all the tools they need to explain the universe. They have always been wrong. From consciousness to dark energy, we know that we are missing an unknowable number of pieces of the puzzle. He goes on to say, this is why, in the debates between the strict atheists and the fundamentally religious, I choose a third side. A little less pretense of certainty and a little more exploration of the possibility space. As Voltaire put it, doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. Certainty is absurd. Are we really so anxious and insecure that we have to take God and the universe and force it into a familiar looking box that only serves to limit possibility? Are we so anxious and insecure that we have to qualify and limit what is probably infinite? Are we so fearful that we have to superimpose our concept of mind and personality on top of everything and make it conform to our way of thinking or our way of looking at the world? If we were to let go of that, what might happen? Might be a little uncomfortable at first, but this is another one of those big questions that philosophers and theologians have been wrestling with for ages. In particular, there was a fellow named Meister Eckhart, who you might have heard of. He was a Dominican priest who's regarded as one of the greatest mystics and philosophers in the Western world. Now, this goes back to the 13th century. And this is something that comes from one of his sermons. He gave his sermons in the form of German that was used back in those days. Translation can be kind of difficult, so this may seem a little bit awkward. I don't want this to go by too fast, though, so let's take it gradually. Here's Meister Eckhart in one of his sermons. He says, "Where the creature ends, there God begins to be. God only asks that you get out of his way insofar as you are creature, and let him be God in you. The least creaturely idea that ever entered your mind is as big as God. Why? Because it will keep God out of you entirely. The moment you get ideas, God fades out. It is when the idea is gone that God gets in. Ah, beloved people, why don't you let God be God in you? What are you afraid of?" Just sit with that for a few moments. And in fact, this is something to sit with more than once, which is why, again, I've given you this quote. It's on the insert in your bulletin. What does he mean when he says, "Where the creature ends, there God begins to be"? Well, here's one possibility. The creature, obviously, is me. Or it can be human consciousness, or even the human perspective that likes to see everything as just another reflection of itself. That's the creature that has to end in order for God to begin to be. That's the thing that has to end in order for God and the universe to get in. The moment we get ideas, God fades out. Doesn't mean that ideas and thinking are bad. Meister Eckhart was a scholastic philosopher. He was following in the footsteps of Thomas Aquinas. He did lots of thinking. He had lots of ideas. But the thing is that he didn't let those thoughts and ideas become set in concrete. And above all, he didn't substitute his ideas and thoughts about God for God. The moment we get ideas about God, God fades out. It's when the idea about God is gone that God gets in, that the possibilities open up. When I was studying in the Catholic seminary back in the 70s, Meister Eckhart was not a name that anyone mentioned, which is because he was charged with heresy back in those days. Can you imagine that? Being charged with heresy for saying things like that in the 13th century? Well, yeah, he was a bit ahead of his time, I would say. And even though he was never condemned, some of his ideas were. That's what happens to people who are ahead of their time. It took until 1992 before the church finally came out and acknowledged that he was in the clear, which is about the same time that you started to see a lot of books and things coming out talking about his writings and his sermons and this resurgence of interest that we've seen in Meister Eckhart. He's a popular guy now, and we're just, I think, starting to catch on to what he was talking about back then. So when we're confronted by this question of whether the universe has a purpose, maybe we need to take a little different approach. We can start by letting go of the need to be certain. And like Dr. Tyson, perhaps be willing to admit that we're not all that sure. Let's be possibilians. And then, taking a cue from Meister Eckhart, we simply let God be God in us. We let the universe be the universe. We dive in. We see what can happen. We learn all that we can about it. Like Dr. Tyson said, try to know more about it today than we did yesterday. We dive in, we learn all we can about it without letting our thoughts and ideas get in the way of other possibilities, unfolding possibilities. We may even find that we're asking the wrong question. Does the universe have a single absolute purpose that holds true for everything in every particle of infinite space? I'm not sure. Maybe the better question is to ask, how should we live? How should we live? Here we are. Here we are. What do we make of it? How should we live? Should we live seeing ourselves as separate and fragmented? Or should we see and experience ourselves as living with a common purpose? Now, if that's the question, how should we live, then maybe we need to look at something else that Dr. Tyson said. He said, when I look up at the night sky, and I know that, yes, we are part of this universe, we are in this universe, but perhaps more important than both of those facts is that the universe is in us. Many people feel small because they're small and the universe is big. But I feel big because my atoms came from those stars. There's a level of connectivity. Not just his atoms, but everyone else's atoms came from those stars. There's a level of connectivity. So instead of looking for a purpose, maybe we should focus on making a choice. Separate and fragmented, or connected with a common purpose that binds us all together. You get to decide. Choose wisely. See you next week.